sound of children playing. Happy giggles, a smiling child no older than 7, cannonballs into a sun-drenched pool. His laugh a symphony of summer. Narrator, voiceover strained, I trusted this place. I trusted the people. I trusted her. The child's face, mid-splash, goes from pure joy to a look of confusion, then sudden terror. The camera pans slowly to a woman with a severe, disapproving expression standing by the pool's edge, arms crossed. Water distorts, everything slows, and the playful sounds warp into an eerie silence. Woman, coldly, voice clear. He was being too loud. The mother, still on the sun-warmed concrete, lets out a silent, slow-motion scream as she lunges forward. Her world shatters. The heat of the concrete radiated through the thin soles of Maya's sandals, a gentle warmth that promised a long, lazy afternoon. Her 7-year-old son, Leo, was a sun-kissed blur of perpetual motion, a human hummingbird in red swim trunks. He lived for the water, for the thrill of a good splash, for the simple, unadulterated joy of summer. The Crestwood Community Pool was his kingdom, and today, as with every Saturday, he was its king. Maya watched from her lounge chair, a smile touching her lips as she scrolled absently through her phone. It was the kind of peace she'd always craved, the hum of happy chatter, the sound of kids' laughter echoing off the water, the ever-present, reassuring presence of other parents. This was their sanctuary, a place of safety and trust. No strangers, no surprises, just a familiar cast of neighborhood faces, until Brenda arrived. She didn't announce her presence so much as she imposed it. A thin, sharply dressed woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat, she moved with the deliberate, self-important grace of a queen surveying her unruly subjects. She set her things down with a decisive thud on the chair next to Maya, not a single word of greeting exchanged. Brenda, or Karen, as the younger parents had privately nicknamed her, was an immovable object in a world of casual chaos. She was the one who complained about a single stray leaf in the pool, the one who tutted audibly when a child was running, the one whose very existence seemed to be a silent rebuke to anyone having too much fun. Leo's giggles, usually a welcome sound, became a ticking clock. He was engaged in an epic splash battle with a boy named Ethan from 2 streets over. Their joyful shouts were not malicious, just loud, a natural byproduct of their exuberant play. But Brenda's eyes, magnified by her prescription sunglasses, found them immediately. Her lips thinned into a razor-sharp line, and she shifted in her chair, a subtle but unmistakable declaration of war. Maya's heart rate ticked up. "Leo, buddy, maybe a little less of volume," she said, her voice soft but firm. He looked over, his grin not fading for a second. "But we're pirates, Mom. We have to make noise." "I know, but—" She trailed off, glancing nervously at Brenda. The woman was now staring directly at them, her face a mask of stone. It wasn't just a look of annoyance. It was pure, cold judgment. It made Maya's skin crawl. "Just a little quieter, okay?" Maya pleaded. Leo gave her a quick, wet thumbs up and returned to his game, a little more subdued. The truce was short-lived. A stray ball, lobbed by Ethan, bounced off the pool's edge and skittered into the shallow end. Leo, not wanting to break the pirate code, launched himself after it, splashing with renewed fervor. That was the line Brenda couldn't uncross. "This is a community pool, not a water park," Brenda's voice, devoid of all warmth, sliced through the air. "Some of us would like a little peace and quiet." Maya instinctively stiffened. "They're just kids playing, Brenda." "Kids," Brenda scoffed, a sneer twisting her lips, "who apparently lack any sense of decorum or respect for others." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She felt the sudden hot flush of defensive anger. Leo, hearing the exchange, looked over, his eyes wide with a familiar shame. He hated being the center of adult conflict. "Leo, come on," Maya said, her tone sharper than she intended. "Just get your ball and let's go." "We'll go to the park later." Brenda's gaze didn't waver. It was fixed on Leo, a chilling, contemptuous stare. The boy hesitated for a split second, his small frame tensing under the weight of her judgment. The ball was only a few feet from him in the shallow end, but Brenda's eyes felt like a spotlight on his every movement. He felt scrutinized, exposed. He wanted to get out of the pool and hide. He reached for the ball, his movements suddenly awkward, self-conscious. But another child, a little girl running along the side, veered suddenly to avoid a towel and bumped hard into Brenda. It was a small bump, a trivial accident. But it was enough. Watch it, Brenda snapped, her composure cracking. She took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of her beach bag. She stumbled slightly, a graceless, frantic motion. "Look what you've done," she hissed at the little girl, her voice a low, furious growl. The girl's mother rushed over, apologizing profusely. "I am so sorry, she didn't mean to—" Brenda cut her off with a vicious glare. Some people don't supervise their children at all. All this time, Leo was watching, frozen in the shallow end. He was so distracted by the unfolding scene, so focused on the furious face of the woman who hated him, that he didn't notice the wet patch on the concrete. The stray ball had been left in the shallow end, not the deep end as planned. But now another ball, a bright yellow beach ball, had drifted lazily into the deeper section of the pool, a few feet beyond his reach. He wasn't supposed to be in the deep end without an adult. He knew the rule. He was a decent swimmer, but the fear of the deep end was still there, a whisper of caution in his mind. But in that moment, all he wanted was to escape Brenda's seething anger. He just wanted to get his ball and be done with it. He took a single panicked step forward. The edge of the concrete was slick with water. His foot slipped. The force of the stumble, combined with his forward momentum, sent him careening into the deep end. Maya's scream was a high, thin thread, tearing through the afternoon air. It was a primal, gut-wrenching sound that no parent should ever have to make. She dropped her phone, her sunglasses, everything, and scrambled to her feet. She saw him, his small body flailing, his hands pawing at the surface of the water. He was a strong swimmer, but the slip, the shock of the cold, and the sudden panic had stolen his breath. He went under, a single terrified gasp, creating a final ring of bubbles on the surface. Brenda, still standing by the edge, looked down at the spot where he had vanished. Her face, a moment before twisted in fury, was now a mask of cold indifference. It was a blank, unreadable slate. She didn't move. Maya didn't waste a second on an internal monologue. She just ran, the concrete scraping the soles of her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hit the water with a frantic splash, the cool liquid a jarring shock against her skin. She dove under, her eyes straining to find him in the murky blue. She found him on the bottom, a small, still shape. His eyes were open, wide with a final, silent plea. She grabbed him, her fingers clumsy on his small arm, and pulled him to the surface. His body was limp, heavy. She fought her way back to the side, dragging his lifeless weight. Other parents, their faces a mixture of horror and confusion, were now scrambling out of the water. Someone was screaming for an ambulance. Someone else was trying to push Maya to the side to perform CPR, but Maya held him. She cradled him in her arms, his small body a cold, fragile weight, as the wail of sirens grew closer. She buried her face in his wet hair, the scent of chlorine and summer a cruel and bitter parody of what should have been. Paramedics arrived, a blur of red and white. They tried to pry him from her arms. She refused. No, he's okay," she sobbed. "He's okay, he's resting." A police officer, a tall, grim-faced woman, pushed through the crowd. "Ma'am, what happened?" And then a voice, a familiar voice from a lounge chair nearby. It was Mrs. Gable, a kind-faced retiree who had been knitting all afternoon. "I saw the whole thing, officer. That woman, Brenda, she was yelling at the little boy. And then he fell in." The officer turned, her gaze landing on Brenda. Brenda stood perfectly still, a lone, unmoving figure in the swirling chaos. She wasn't wringing her hands, she wasn't crying, she wasn't even pretending to be remorseful. She just stood there, her face a mask of defiant indignation. "I just told him to stop splashing," Brenda said, her voice a calm, chilling monotone. "He was being too loud. It's a pool rule." The paramedics finally succeeded in taking Leo from Maya's arms, his small body disappearing onto a gurney. Maya's eyes, swimming with tears, found Brenda's. The full, monstrous weight of the truth settled over her. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't fate. It was a consequence of a woman's petty anger, and in Brenda's cold, dead eyes there was no sorrow. There was only the flicker of irritation, of a perfectly good afternoon ruined by a child's inconvenient and messy death. The wail of the sirens was a raw, visceral sound that sliced through the mundane afternoon. It was the siren song of a nightmare, and Maya was trapped in its melody. The paramedics had finally managed to gently but firmly take Leo from her arms. His skin was the color of weak tea, his lips a pale blue that mocked the vibrant red of his swim trunks. She watched, numb, as they laid him on a gurney, a sterile white rectangle that seemed utterly wrong for his small, sun-kissed body. Someone was performing chest compressions, their rhythmic, insistent pushes a brutal reminder of the stillness beneath their hands. The police officer, a woman with a no-nonsense face and dark professional eyes, knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Maya's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She just pointed. A trembling finger aimed at Brenda. The woman stood perfectly still by her chair, a silent, unmoving statue. Her face was as emotionless as stone, a chilling contrast to the sobbing mothers and stunned fathers who had formed a semicircle of silent witnesses. "Brenda," Maya rasped, her voice a rusted whisper. "It was Brenda." The officer, whose name tag read Officer Davies, followed her gaze. She stood up and approached Brenda, her voice shifting to a low, authoritative tone. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Davies. Can you tell me what happened?" Brenda's response was a masterpiece of cool detachment. "I was relaxing. Those two children were being incredibly disruptive. I asked them to be quiet. Then that little boy, the one on the gurney, he slipped and fell in. Did you push him?" Officer Davies's question was blunt, her eyes boring into Brenda's. A look of affront, cold and theatrical, crossed Brenda's face. "Of course not. I wouldn't dream of such a thing. He was running, which is against the rules. He slipped. It was an unfortunate accident, a tragic consequence of poor supervision." Maya, hearing the words, felt a jolt of fire go through her frozen veins. "You were yelling at him!" she screamed, pushing herself to her feet. The world swayed around her. "You were yelling at him! He was scared of you! That's why he slipped!" Brenda didn't even turn her head. She spoke to the officer as if Maya was a background noise, an inconvenient fly. As you can see, she's very distraught. It's understandable. Grief can make people say irrational things. The subtle implication that Maya was an unreliable narrator, a hysterical mother, was a calculated, vicious blow. Officer Davies held up a hand to Maya, a nonverbal command to stand down. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." He was just trying to get away from her, Maya pleaded, tears finally streaming down her face, scalding her skin. "She was scaring him." A few people in the crowd nodded in agreement, their faces grim. Mrs. Gable, the older woman, stepped forward, her hands twisting her knitting needles. "She's right, officer. I saw it." Brenda was giving that little boy the most awful glare. And when that other girl bumped into her, she got so angry. He was just trying to get away from the conflict. He was so upset. Another parent, a young father named Mark, stepped up. "My son Ethan was playing with him," he said. Brenda was yelling. "Leo just wanted to get his ball so he could leave. He was trying to hurry." Brenda turned to them, her smile thin and condescending. "I was simply enforcing the rules. This pool has rules for a reason. And as for your son, Mark, maybe he should have been supervised more closely himself. He's the one who threw the ball that started the incident after all." The jab was a masterstroke of deflection, a casual twisting of the truth that sowed doubt and created new targets. The crowd's united front fractured. Mark's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Officer Davies took it all in, her gaze moving from face to face, her expression unreadable. She motioned for another officer who had just arrived. "Let's get everyone's statement. Separately." Maya was taken to a picnic table under a large, shaded tree, her body shaking uncontrollably. She watched as Brenda was led away, her spine ramrod straight, her expression a study in righteous indignation. Brenda's composure was an affront to the universe, an insult to everything sacred. The next 2 hours were a blur of questions, repeated over and over. Maya answered with a weary, desperate honesty. She described Leo's joy, Brenda's arrival, the escalating tension, the way Leo had looked at her with fear in his eyes. She recounted the fall, the splash, the sickening stillness of the water. Each word was a shard of glass in her throat, a brutal reliving of the worst moment of her life. "And you're certain her actions caused him to fall?" the officer asked, her voice quiet. "Yes," Maya said, her voice firm. He slipped because he was scared. He wasn't running wildly. He was trying to get away from her. The officer scribbled in her notebook. "It's a tough case, ma'am." He wasn't pushed. It was an indirect consequence. "There's no law against being rude." The words hung in the air, a devastating statement of fact. It was a perfectly legal death, an accidental death. "Just a kid who slipped, but it wasn't an accident," Maya cried, tears of pure rage filling her eyes. "She did this. She made it happen!" The officer's face softened, a flicker of genuine sympathy in her eyes. "I understand, ma'am. We'll do everything we can. We've got multiple statements, but without a direct witness to a push or a shove." Later, Maya found herself standing alone at the edge of the pool. The scene was eerily quiet now. The police tape was gone, the paramedics had left, and the crowd had dispersed. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the empty chairs. The chlorine scent was still heavy in the air, a cloying, suffocating smell that would forever be associated with this moment. She walked to the spot where he fell, a small dark stain on the concrete. She knelt, her fingers tracing the outline of the stain, a monument to a life cut short. She had been there. She had been a few feet away, and yet she had failed to protect him. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. A shadow fell over her. She looked up. Brenda stood there, arms crossed, a look of cool victory on her face. "They couldn't charge me," Brenda said, her voice as smooth as polished ice. "They said it was a tragic accident," which it was. "If people just followed the rules, these things wouldn't happen." "You did this," Maya whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. Brenda laughed, a single sharp sound that held no humor. "Me? I'm the victim here. My entire afternoon was ruined. And now I'll have to deal with the police and the rumors and the gossip, all because a mother couldn't control her child." The audacity of the statement was breathtaking. It was a cold, cruel final confirmation of what Maya already knew. This wasn't just a woman who had a bad day. This was a monster, a creature devoid of empathy, whose petty frustrations had a body count. Maya's sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Her grief would not be enough. The law would not be enough. Brenda was going to walk away from this, unscathed and unrepentant, and the sheer injustice of it was a searing brand on Maya's soul. She had lost everything, and Brenda had lost a single sunny afternoon. "This isn't over," Maya said, her voice low and steady. It was not a threat. It was a promise. "I'm going to make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows exactly what you did." Brenda's smile was as empty as her soul. "You do that, dear, and I'll tell them the truth. A boy died because he had a negligent mother. A tragedy for sure, but nothing more than that." She turned and walked away. A casual, elegant stroll, as if she were simply leaving the pool after a pleasant day. Maya watched her go, the words echoing in her mind. Negligent mother. The lie was so insidious, so perfectly crafted, that it felt more painful than the truth. But as Brenda disappeared from view, something else surfaced in Maya. Not just grief, not just anger, but a new, terrifying clarity. She had no legal recourse, no proof. The system would fail her. But there was another way, a way that didn't require a judge or a jury, a way that involved a community and the power of a story, a very true and very dark story. The silence of Maya's house was a suffocating thing. Every toy left on the floor, every crayon mark on the wall, every misplaced sneaker was a small, brutal reminder of the boy who was no longer there. The grief was a physical presence, a dense fog in her lungs that made it hard to breathe. But beneath the suffocating weight of sorrow, a cold, hard ember of purpose was glowing. Brenda's words, "A boy died because he had a negligent mother," echoed in the quiet rooms, a grotesque mantra that fueled a new kind of fire. The law had failed her, but the community had not. She would start there. Her first visit was to Mrs. Gable, the kind-faced woman who had been knitting by the pool. The door opened to a gentle, sympathetic face, her eyes clouded with an unspoken sorrow. She led Maya to the living room, a warm, cozy space that felt a world away from the sterile horror of the pool deck. "I'm so sorry, dear," Mrs. Gable said, her voice soft. "I've been thinking about you constantly. It's just so terrible." "You saw what happened," Maya said, getting straight to the point, her voice raw. "You saw how she was with him." Mrs. Gable nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I did, and I told the police everything. But they said it was an accident. And Brenda?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering nervously towards the window. "She's already been around. She came over the next day with a casserole, would you believe it? And she talked about how tragic it was and how she was so upset that she was being blamed. She said you were distraught and that she was a victim of your grief." The words landed like a physical blow. Brenda hadn't just moved on. She was actively managing the narrative. She had turned herself into the sympathetic figure, the one who had her afternoon ruined and was now being unjustly accused by a grieving mother. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. "She's telling people I'm unstable," Maya said, her voice trembling with anger. "She's saying you're lashing out," Mrs. Gable confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. She said she understands, but that she won't be slandered. "She's a very persuasive person, Maya." Mrs. Gable's hesitation was a stark warning. The neighborhood, usually a close-knit group, was already fracturing. People were choosing sides, and Brenda, with her calm demeanor and practiced lies, was winning. Maya thanked Mrs. Gable and left, the cold dread settling deeper in her stomach. She tried 2 more houses that afternoon. Mark, the father of the boy playing with Leo, answered the door with a guilty, averted gaze. "Maya, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice flat. "But the police said, you know. And Brenda's been talking. My wife and I, we just don't want to get involved. It's just too much drama." The betrayal was a sickening twist. Mark had seen it too. But he, like so many others, was choosing the path of least resistance. He chose to believe the convenient lie over the ugly truth. The last person she spoke to, a woman who lived across the street from the pool, was even worse. "Brenda is a very nice woman," the woman said, her voice tight with disapproval. "She's always been a stickler for rules, but that's what makes this such a nice neighborhood. I just think it's a shame that you're going around accusing people like this, especially when you should be with your family." The words were a direct echo of Brenda's narrative. Maya was a distraction, a problem, a mother who couldn't handle her grief and was now causing a scene. She returned home, her hands balled into fists, the fire of her resolve now a roaring inferno. She couldn't do this one-on-one. The whispers were too fast, the lies too insidious. She needed a public forum, a place where she could stand up, face Brenda, and speak the truth for everyone to hear. She needed to expose the monster for what she was. The Crestwood community meeting was held the next evening at the clubhouse. Maya arrived early, her stomach churning. She saw Brenda there in the back, sitting with her husband. Brenda was talking to a group of people, her gestures animated, her face a mask of concern. She was a master performer, and Maya felt a surge of raw, unadulterated hatred. The meeting began with a discussion of the annual neighborhood garage sale. Maya sat through it all, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes never leaving Brenda. When the meeting's president asked if there were any new items for discussion, Maya's hand shot up. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have something to say." All eyes turned to her. A heavy silence fell over the room. The air was thick with tension, a palpable unease. Maya stood, her knees shaking. "My name is Maya Larson," she said, her voice gaining strength as she went. "And my son Leo died here last week." A collective gasp went through the room. A few people looked away, uncomfortable. Brenda, however, met her gaze with a cold, almost amused expression. "It was ruled an accident," Maya continued, her voice now steady. "But it wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of a woman's cruelty. My son, a 7-year-old boy, was terrified of her. She screamed at him for laughing too loud. She berated him for playing. He slipped and fell into the deep end because he was trying to get away from her. A buzz of murmuring erupted. Maya pointed a finger directly at Brenda. "That woman," she said, her voice cracking with emotion, "is responsible for my son's death. She may not have pushed him, but her actions led to his death as surely as if she had." Brenda stood up, a calm, practiced smile on her face. "I'm so sorry, Maya, I really am. But, as the police report stated, this was a tragic accident. I did nothing more than remind a child of the rules. A simple request that escalated because a child was being, well, an unsupervised child. The phrase unsupervised child was a subtle, devastating knife twist. She's lying," Maya yelled. "You all saw it. Mrs. Gable saw it. Mark saw it. She was being cruel." Brenda's smile didn't waver. "As I said, grief can be a powerful emotion. It makes people see things that aren't there." She turned to the crowd, her voice calm and reasonable. "I did not scream. I did not berate. I simply asked for common courtesy. It's a tragedy, yes, but a tragedy born of carelessness, not malice." The crowd was a sea of confused faces. They didn't want to believe that a neighbor could be so cold. They wanted to believe in accidents, in unfortunate circumstances. Maya was losing them. The truth, in all its ugly complexity, was a harder sell than a simple lie. A woman in the front row, a mother of a teenager, spoke up. "Brenda, I hate to say this, but my daughter told me something." She hesitated, looking nervously at Brenda. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "What is your daughter, a teenager, going to tell you that is relevant to this tragedy?" she asked, the contempt in her voice barely veiled. "She was a junior lifeguard last summer," the woman said, her voice gaining strength. "She was on duty. And you yelled at her because she wouldn't make a little boy with a hearing aid stop splashing. You said he was being disruptive and that the pool was too loud for you to relax. She told you he couldn't hear you, and you said, 'Then he has no business being here.' And then you threatened to report her to the board." The room went silent. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, no longer uncertain but electric with shock. Brenda's calm facade finally shattered. Her eyes, filled with a sudden, vicious panic, darted from the woman to Maya, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "That's a lie," Brenda hissed, her voice a dangerous low growl, "a complete and total fabrication. I would never say such a thing, but it was too late. The dam had broken. The truth, ugly and raw, had finally found its way out. The crowd wasn't looking at Maya anymore, the hysterical mother. They were looking at Brenda, the cruel, cold monster who had just been exposed. And in the silence that followed the teenager's mother's words was a living thing, heavy and electric, charged with 100 unspoken accusations. The room, which a moment before had been a sea of confused faces, was now a jury of 150 pairs of eyes, all fixed on Brenda. Her mask had not just slipped. It had shattered into a million jagged pieces. The calm, condescending smile was gone, replaced by a contorted grimace of pure, unbridled rage. The polite, measured woman was gone, and in her place was something monstrous. Her husband, a mild-mannered man named David, looked from his wife to the shocked faces around them, his own face pale with a dawning horror. He had been a silent partner in her life, a man who believed in her narrative, who accepted her version of events without question. But the accusation, the cold, ugly truth about a child with a hearing aid, was a truth so vile, so perfectly in character, that it couldn't be denied. He looked at her, and for the first time he saw a stranger. "That's a lie," Brenda repeated, but the conviction was gone. Her voice was a low, desperate snarl. "She's just trying to cause trouble. This is an attack on me, on my character, on our family." Her eyes, filled with a sudden, panicked animal fear, darted around the room. But no one was buying it. The moment had passed. The doubt had been removed. The truth had found its witness. Maya stood perfectly still, watching it all unfold, the sick feeling of grief, finally for a moment, being eclipsed by a cold, searing satisfaction. This wasn't justice, not yet, but it was a beginning. A very small, very public victory. The meeting's president, a man named Tom, finally found his voice. "Brenda, I think it would be best if you left." "Left?" Brenda shrieked, her voice high and shrill. After this slander, this is outrageous. I am a paying member of this community. You can't just throw me out. But the crowd had turned on her. Voices once hesitant were now loud and full of indignation. You're a disgrace, someone shouted. Get out of here, another yelled. David, his face a mask of shame and disbelief, stood and gently but firmly took Brenda by the arm. Come on, Brenda, he whispered, his voice shaking. Let's go. No, I'm not leaving, she raged, trying to pull away. I did nothing wrong. This is a conspiracy, a disgusting lie to cover up her own failure. She pointed a trembling finger at Maya. This is all her fault. She's a terrible mother. But her words were drowned out by the rising tide of anger. David finally managed to half-drag, half-walk her out of the clubhouse, her furious, tear-streaked face a final, horrifying image for everyone to see. Maya stayed behind, her knees finally giving out as she sat down in her chair, a sudden crushing wave of exhaustion washing over her. She had won the battle for public opinion, but it felt hollow. It didn't bring Leo back. It didn't erase the memory of his small, still body. A few people came up to her, their faces now contorted with a mixture of guilt and sympathy. Mrs. Gable took her hand, squeezing it. I'm so sorry, Maya. We should have seen it sooner. We just didn't want to believe it. Mark, the father of Leo's friend, approached her, his head bowed. I'm so sorry, Maya. I was a coward. I should have stood up for you. But Maya couldn't accept their apologies. Their silence had been complicity. Their fear of drama had enabled Brenda's lies. She just nodded, her eyes distant, and walked out into the cool night air. She returned to her dark, quiet house, the victory feeling less like a triumph and more like a grim confirmation. She had done what she set out to do. The neighborhood now knew the truth. But what was next? The law was still a closed door. Public opinion was a small comfort, not a solution. She lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, the image of Brenda's face. That final look of pure, raw hatred burned into her mind. Brenda would not let this go. Maya knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was far from over. The next morning, the retaliatory strike came. It wasn't a public confrontation, but a quiet, vicious act of cowardice. Maya walked out to get her mail, the morning sun feeling warm on her skin, a brief respite from the cold inside. As she approached her mailbox, she saw it. Scrawled across the side in large black permanent marker were 2 words, Bad Mother. Her breath caught in her throat. She touched the harsh, ugly letters, her fingers tracing the cruel words. The message was a precise, targeted attack, a poisoned arrow aimed at the one thing that was already raw and bleeding. It wasn't just a physical act of vandalism. It was a psychological assault. She looked up and down the street. It was quiet, too quiet. She had no way of knowing who had done it, but she knew. She knew it was Brenda. The cold, calculated cruelty of the act, the way it mirrored the words Brenda had spoken to her, was unmistakable. Brenda wasn't just angry. She was desperate. Cornered animals lash out, and Brenda was a very dangerous animal indeed. Maya's hands trembled, not with fear, but with a new, terrifying clarity. The public sphere, the world of gossip and reputation, was a small, petty playground. But Brenda had just moved the conflict into the shadows, into the personal. This wasn't about winning an argument anymore. This was about survival. She grabbed her phone and snapped a picture of the mailbox. She knew the police wouldn't do anything. It was just property damage, a simple, anonymous act. But it wasn't anonymous to her. It was a declaration of war, a war not just for justice, but for her own sanity. She walked back inside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The small, petty acts would not stop. They would escalate. She had exposed Brenda's character to the neighborhood. Now, Brenda was going to expose Maya's pain to the world. Maya stood in her kitchen, the phone in her hand, the picture of the defaced mailbox on the screen. She had been naive to think this would be simple. She had thought a little public shaming would be enough, but she had underestimated her enemy. Brenda wasn't just a petty neighborhood tyrant. She was a vengeful, dangerous woman who was willing to go to any lengths to get back what she felt she had lost. And in that moment, Maya understood that she had to stop playing by the rules. The game had just changed. The stakes had been raised, and the battle lines were no longer drawn in the concrete of the community pool, but on the asphalt of her own driveway. The words on the mailbox, stark and ugly, felt less like a threat and more like a challenge. Bad mother. A poisoned arrow, perfectly aimed at her deepest wound. Maya stood there for a long moment, the morning sun warm on her skin, the cool rage in her veins a sharp, exhilarating contrast. She didn't feel fear. She felt clarity. The rules were gone. Brenda had declared a new kind of war, fought not with words in a crowded room, but with quiet. Vicious acts meant to bleed her out slowly. She took the picture, the screen of her phone capturing the cruel black letters. Then, with a cold, deliberate calm, she went back inside. She wasn't calling the police. She wasn't going to talk to her neighbors. This was personal. This was for her. And for Leo, her hands, no longer trembling with a helpless grief, were steady as she opened her laptop. She typed, a furious, focused energy driving her. She didn't write a blog post. She didn't write an email to the neighborhood board. She went to the neighborhood's unofficial Facebook group, a place of lost dogs, garage sale listings, and friendly gossip. It was a digital town square, and this was where she would make her stand. Her post was simple, direct, and unsparingly honest. She didn't mention the mailbox. She didn't have to. The truth was far more powerful. She wrote about Leo, about his laughter, his love for the water, his shy smile. She painted a picture of a boy full of life who had simply wanted to retrieve his ball. She described Brenda's cruel, cold words. She wrote about her own helplessness as she watched her son go into the water. And then she wrote about Brenda. Not with insults, but with facts. She recounted the story the teenager's mother had told. She mentioned the incident with the child who had the hearing aid. She described Brenda's chilling lack of remorse at the community meeting. And she ended with a single question. Is this the kind of person we want in our community? A person who can show such casual cruelty to a child and then blame a grieving mother for the consequences? She hit post and watched the digital world of her community ignite. The likes and comments poured in. Some were from people who had been at the meeting, their words now full of a righteous public indignation. Others were from parents who had their own stories, their own quiet moments of confrontation with Brenda that they had never dared to share. The dam had broken. The truth, ugly and detailed, was now a public spectacle, a permanent stain on Brenda's carefully curated image. The first response from Brenda was a furious, personal message to Maya, so vile it made Maya's stomach turn. She laughed without a hint of humor. This was what she had wanted, to shatter the mask and show the monster underneath. A few hours later, the post was gone, deleted. Brenda must have complained to a moderator. Maya didn't care. It was already too late. The words were copied, the screenshots were taken, and the story was already circulating in private chats and group texts. The digital genie was out of the bottle and no one could put it back. The retaliation was swift and brutally efficient. Later that day, Maya got a call at her office. Her boss's voice was tight, uncomfortable. Maya, I'm sorry to do this, but I've received a very disturbing report about your conduct. Someone has filed a complaint alleging that you are unstable, harassing people, and creating a hostile environment in the community. It's affecting your professional image. We're putting you on paid administrative leave until this is sorted out. The phone felt heavy in her hand. She had known Brenda would escalate, but this was a new low. Brenda hadn't just attacked her mailbox or her reputation. She had attacked her livelihood. She had taken a war of words and turned it into an economic siege. Maya's face went cold. She had thought about leaving the neighborhood, about running away from the toxic, suffocating atmosphere. But the call from her boss solidified her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for her son's memory anymore. She was fighting for her survival. Brenda wanted her gone, completely broken and utterly erased. That evening, as the sun began to set, a car pulled up to Maya's house. It wasn't the police. It was David, Brenda's husband. He got out of the car, his shoulders slumped, and walked slowly up her driveway. He looked older, more tired than he had at the community meeting. His face was a map of exhaustion and quiet shame. Maya, he said, his voice raspy. I wanted to talk to you. Maya, who was on her porch, her arms crossed, didn't move. About what, David? Your wife's latest attempt to ruin my life? He winced. I'm so sorry about what she did. I saw it myself. I told her it was wrong. This is insane. I didn't know. His eyes met hers, and there was a flicker of something real in them. Regret, and a terrified kind of helplessness. She's not the person I thought she was. No, Maya said, her voice flat. She's not. She's a murderer. David flinched at the word. It was an accident. The police didn't have to live with her, Maya countered, her voice now hard and unforgiving. They didn't have to watch as she took a perfectly happy little boy and made him so terrified he couldn't see where he was going. She killed him, David. She killed my son. And now she's going after my job, my reputation, my sanity. He hung his head, unable to meet her gaze. She's out of control. The things she's saying, the things she's doing. I've told her to stop. I've told her to just let it go. But she won't. She says you're making her a pariah, that you deserve what you get. I deserve to grieve in peace, Maya said, her voice low and filled with a dangerous resolve. But since she won't let me, I'm going to make sure she has nothing to lose. Nothing. I'm going to make her life so unbearable she wishes she had just gone to jail. David looked at her, and his face, already pale, went ashen. Maya, what are you talking about? What are you going to do? I don't know, Maya said, and the words were a terrifying promise. But I'm not going to stop. I'm going to find a way to make her pay. And you, David, you need to decide if you want to be on the right side of history or if you want to be collateral damage. He left without another word, his shoulders even more slumped than when he arrived. Maya watched him go, feeling nothing but a grim satisfaction. He was the next crack in the facade. The perfect suburban life that Brenda had so painstakingly built was crumbling. Maya went back into her house, a singular thought crystallizing in her mind. David was the key. He was the one person who had the legal and emotional leverage to bring Brenda down. The police wouldn't do anything, but a divorce attorney might. And if David knew the full ugly truth, if he saw the full extent of his wife's malice, he might just be the one to finally bring her to justice. She sat at her kitchen table. The silence of the house no longer a sign of grief, but a silent, strategic partner. Her phone lay on the table. She opened her browser and started a new search. Crestwood divorce attorney. The fight was no longer about public opinion. It was about truth and justice, and the battle had just moved from the streets to the courtroom.